everyone, Miss Diorio here from Citizenship Academy with another read aloud. Today I'm going to read you a story that's very, very special to me. This was one of my favorite books when I was probably a little younger than you, maybe 4 or 5. This story is called Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Now this story takes place in a different city. It takes place in the city of Boston, which is about a 5-hour drive from here. Now that's where I grew up. A lot of you guys grew up in Syracuse, or maybe you grew up in a different country. I grew up in and around the city of Boston. So this story, my parents used to read to me when I was little, and there's even the place where the story takes place. There's little statues of ducks. I used to go visit those statues when I was little. Really cute. So this story's kind of long, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Okay, it's called Make Way for Ducklings. It's a great spring story. All right, here's a picture of the ducklings being hatched. You're going to notice all of these pictures are this brown pencil color. There's not much color in them, but they really do come to life. They're really well done. Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. This is a very great place to stay the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, and so down they flopped. The next morning they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a full boat of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water. So the Mallards followed them all the way around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. Does that look like it's a real bird on the back of that boat? No. These are called Swan Boats. So you can people take tours on the little boats. I did that a couple times when I was a kid. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed on the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes, no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But trying to see what might be a problem here. "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, owl of a dither. "You'll get run over." And when she caught her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies, with all those horrid things rushing about. We have to look somewhere else." Almost got run over. Not good for babies. So they flew on Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. And ducks for sure need water. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mrs. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way away from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks just the right place to hatch ducklings. Lots of water." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt, and their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly until new ones grew in. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the river bank, and there they met a policeman named Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. for their lovely peanut lunches. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs and keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count her eggs to make sure they were all there. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, and then Lack, and then Mack, and then Knack, and then Whack, and then Pack, and then Quack. And Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them quite busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week at the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing children up." And she did. Look at all those little ducklings. She taught them how to swim and dive. Get their food. She taught them to walk in a line and to come when they were called and keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Quack, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all fell into a line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam with her to the opposite bank. That nice straight line. There they waded ashore and waddled along until they came to the highway. Uh-oh. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. "Honk, honk!" went the horns in the speeding cars. "Quack!" went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back. "Quack, quack, quack, quack!" went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack-a-lacking. Silly. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. Michael to the rescue. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop traffic, and beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. They made it! He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks!" yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick!" He's got to protect those ducklings. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Clack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well, now ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with a little extra swing in her waddle. The proud Mama Duck. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back traffic so the ducklings could march across the street. Right on into the public garden. Inside the gate, they turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. The whole Mallard family is safe. When they reached the pond, they swam across the little island, and there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised, back where they started. The ducklings liked the new island so much they decided to live there. All day long they swam by the boats and ate peanuts. You can see them really small by the boat there. by the Swan Boat. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and they go to sleep. The end. I hope you liked that story. So when I was little, I used to go to the Boston Public Garden, and I would ride on the Swan Boats. And they even have, based on this story, little duck statues that we used to sit on and play on for all the 8 little ducklings. Very cool. I hope you liked it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.